Hey everybody, tonight's video is called Let's Go Back, and tonight we continue our pass-through study here in our book of Daniel as we're edging toward the end, where we're going to be looking at Antiochus and the Antichrist revisited. So this prophecy sweeps from the history of spiritual conflict in Israel to the tribulation when Michael aids fully in delivering Israel, and Michael is the archangel. And the prophecy looks ultimately to the final Antichrist. And so today's chapter focuses primarily on Antiochus and the history between him and Daniel. So if you hate history class, this is going to be a very long, brutal thing for you. But if you like history, it's amazing to look at secular history and how it lines up with God's word. So as we kick off here, Daniel chapter 11, verse 1, also in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And so the first year here speaks of 539 BC. And this is the messenger that we saw back in the last chapter, Daniel 10:10, continuing to speak of assisting Michael, even as Michael had strengthened him in the battle with demons in Daniel 10:21, confirming Darius and his purpose of kindness to Israel and decreeing their return. In verse 2, and now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. The fourth will be far richer than them all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. So the 3 in the Persian spear after Cyrus were Cambyses between 530 and 522 BC, Pseudo-Smerdis 522 BC, and Darius I Hystaspes 522 to 486 BC. And bear with me, I'm probably going to butcher all the names today. And the fourth is Xerxes, I called Ahasuerus, and Xerxes I called Asterius, and Esther between 486 465 BC. And Xerxes, by the way, I like to call him X. So you're going to hear me refer to him as X. So the kings after X aren't included, but probably because X failed military campaign against the Greeks between 481 to 479 BC sounded the beginning of the end of Persia, which finally fell in 531 BC to Alexander the Great. In verse 3, then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, we'll pick right back up there in just a few here. But as mentioned, the mighty king is Alexander the Great, who ruled from 336 to 323 BC. Now verse 4. And when he has risen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, not according to his dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. So after Alexander's death in 323 BC, 4 who were not of his posterity took sectors of the wide empire. And the king of the south, Egypt, and the king of the north, who's Syria, receive emphasis in verse 5 and after. And as time moved on, other leaders ruled, crossing and recrossing Palestine. And so Alexander the Great had 3 possible heirs. His half-brother Philip, who was known as mentally deficient. Second, a son born after his death. And third, the illegitimate son named Hercules. So the half-brother and the posthumous son were first designated co-monarchs, each with a regent. But fighting among the regents eventually resulted in the murder of all possible heirs. In verse 5 and 6, also the king of the south shall become strong as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be great dominion. And at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. But she shall give up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So from here through verse 20, covers almost 200 years of war between the bordering powers. Berenice, the daughter of Egypt's Ptolemy II Philadelphus, between 286 and 285 to 246 BC, who married Syria's king Antiochus II Theos between 261 and 246 BC. The latter part of these verses refer to the political advantage that they hoped that the alliance would produce. And Antiochus divorced his wife to marry Berenice. And later, that divorced wife murdered his new wife, her baby son, and even Antiochus by poisoning them. And therefore, she brought her own son, Seleucus II Callinicus, to the throne. In verse 7, but from the branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. So the murdered Berenice's brother stood in the father's place, and his name is Ptolemy II Evergetes of Egypt from 246 to 222 BC. And in reverse, he conquered Syria, sacking their great treasure. In verse 8 and 9, and he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and with their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So Syria's Callinicus attacked Egypt 240 BC, but retreated soundly beaten. And Ptolemy III lived 4 years past Seleucus II. In verse 10, however, his sons shall stir up strife, and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. So the successors, Seleucus' sons, kept up war against Egypt as described in what's coming up in verse 11 through 35. And Antiochus III began to fight against the Ptolemies in 219 BC, and for a time gained control of Palestine and western Syria. And fortress probably refers to Raphia, the Ptolemaic fortress in southern Palestine, where a major battle was fought in 217 BC. In verse 11 and 12 said, and the king of the south shall be moved with rage, and go out and fight with him, and with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will be cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So Ptolemy IV Theopator from 222 to 203 BC devastated the Syrian army under Antiochus III the Great from 223 to 187 BC. And Egypt's advantage would be brief. And Antiochus III suffered great losses, more than 14,000 men, at the Battle of Raphia in 217 BC. Verse 13 through 16, for the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound, and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. So 13 years later, Antiochus returned with a great army and in a series of strikes against Egypt brought Palestine, aka what we see as the glorious land, into his control as far south as Gaza. In an alliance with Philip V in Macedon, Antiochus III raised an even larger army to invade the Ptolemaic kingdom. And Ptolemy IV died under mysterious circumstances and was succeeded by Ptolemy V Epiphanes between 201 and 181 BC, his 4-year-old son. In verse 14, I want to reread. It says, "Now in those times many shall arise against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall." So violent Jews wanted Judean independence from Egypt, but they failed in their revolt. In verse 15, "So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist." So the victory of Antiochus III over the Egyptian general Scopas at Sidon in 198 BC marked the end of the Ptolemaic rule in Palestine. In verse 16 again, "But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power." So Antiochus III the Great took lasting dominion over Israel. In verse 17, "He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of woman to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be with him." So Antiochus feeling pressure from the Fourth Empire from Rome of Daniel 2:40 and Daniel 7:7 to make peace with Egypt, offered his daughter Cleopatra to marry Ptolemy V Epiphanes in 192 BC. And the Syrian therefore hoped his daughter would spy to help him to destroy or weaken Egypt and bring it under his power. And Cleopatra, instead of helping her father, favored her Egyptian mate. In verse 18, "After this he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many. But a ruler shall bring reproach against them to an end. And with the reproach removed, he shall turn his face on him." Or he shall turn his back on him. So Antiochus had set his sights to conquer Greece, along with the Mediterranean coastlands. But this brought him into conflict with Rome, so that Roman Lucius Scipio Antiochus repaid the Syrian aggression against Roman rights in the area with a resounding defeat in 191 BC to 190 BC. In verse 19, "Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found." So Antiochus returned from defeat to his own land, compelled by Rome to relinquish all his territory west of the Taurus and to repay the costs of war. And he was likely killed by defenders of a Persian temple. He tried to plunder it at night in Elymais to get money to pay reparations required by Rome. In verse 20, "There shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle." So Rome required Seleucus IV Philopator to render tribute, for Rome was increasingly powerful, and the Syrians set out to tax his subjects heavily to raise the tribute. So the Syrians had their own Democratic Party at this time. If it was tariffs, it would be the Republican Party. But soon he died after being poisoned. And the glorious kingdom possibly refers to Israel, the glorious land with its splendid temple. And some would say Palestine still. Verse 21, and in its place he shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and siege the kingdom with intrigue. So from here through verse 35, the most cruel king from the north was Seleucid, the Syrian persecutor of Israel, named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, as we discussed also in Daniel chapter 8. And he came to the throne when his brother Seleucus was murdered, and a son of the dead king who might succeed him, Demetrius I Soter, was held hostage in Rome. And in the vacuum, Antiochus sieged power in Syria. In verse 22, with the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. So Egypt's armies were swept away by Antiochus' invading forces as by a flood, aka the military onslaught. And Israel's princes of the covenant, Arius III, was murdered by his own defecting brother Menelaus at the request of Antiochus in 171 BC. In verse 23, and after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. So, in an Egyptian struggle for the throne, Antiochus developed an alliance with Ptolemy IV Philometor over his rival Ptolemy. And Ptolemy the seventh Euergetes, who is distinct leader from the leader in verse 7. And by this league, Antiochus deceitfully plotted to gain greater power in Egypt. And with a small force, he conquered Memphis and the rest of Egypt all the way to Alexandria. So this is not talking about Tennessee of Memphis to Virginia of Alexandria. This is Egypt. In verse 24, he shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, the spoil, and the riches, and he shall devise his plans against strongholds, but only for a time. So Antiochus, under the guise of friendship, plundered the richest Egyptian places that he could strike. And to gain support, he gave lavish gifts, possibly battle spoils. And he formed a scheme to take over Egypt. In verse 25, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. So Antiochus attacked Philometor, who had become his enemy, and the latter fell due to the treachery by trusted supporters who became Antiochus captive. In verse 26, and those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him, his army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So betraying counselors whom Philometor fed led him to attacks in Syria to secure his defeat and death for him and his men. Verse 27, both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table. But it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. So Antiochus feigned help to reinstate Ptolemy Philometor in to Egypt's throne, occupied then by Ptolemy Evergetes. Both kings lied at the conference, and Antiochus set Philometor up as king of Memphis, whereas Evergetes reigned at Alexandria. And so the two Egyptians soon agreed on a joint rule, frustrating the Syrian. In verse 28, and return into his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, so he shall do damage and return to his own land. So en route north through Israel to Syria with riches, Antiochus met a revolt, as sources outside of Scripture mention, like the book of Maccabees. And he struck Jerusalem's temple, profaned the sacrificial system, and he went on to massacre 80,000 men, taking 40,000 prisoners, selling 40,000 as slaves, and squelched a Jewish bid to depose his own designated priests. Many a loss. And so verse 29, at the appointed time he shall return and go to the south, and it shall not be like the former or the latter. So Antiochus for the third time invaded Egypt against the joint rulership in 168 BC, however with much less success. Verse 30, for ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So a Roman fleet from Cyrus sided with Egypt, thwarting Antiochus' attack. And backing down from engaging Rome in war, Antiochus left Egypt, taking out his revenge on the Israelites in his path. And he opposed God's Mosaic covenant that some Jews kept despite Syrian policies and some Jewish compromise. And Antiochus showed favors to Jewish apostates who forsook their holy covenant, as non-biblical writings attest. In verse 31, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary for distress, defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So Antiochus' soldiers, no doubt working with apostate Jews, guarded the temple, halting all worship, while others attacked the city on the Sabbath, slaughtering men, women, and children. And soldiers desecrated Israel's temple. They banned circumcision and daily sacrifices, even going as far as committing the detestable of sacrificing a pig on the altar. And the Syrians on Kislev, which is December 15th, 167 BC, even imposed an idol statue in honor of the Olympian god Zeus into the temple. And the Jews called it the abomination that causes desolation, emptying of ruining for Jewish worship. And Antiochus' soldiers profaned God's temple by spreading sows broth on the altar and banning daily sacrifices, as described in the book of Maccabees. And both Daniel and Jesus said that this barbarity was only a preview of the abomination that would happen later under the Antichrist, as we covered back in Daniel 9:27, and we'll look at the gospel according to Matthew, the Olivet Discourse, in our wrap-up. So, verse 32, to keep going here, says, those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. So, the Jews loyal to God, called Hasidanes, stood on firm conviction, suffering death rather than compromising. And Judas Maccabees, helped by Rome, led them in a successful revolt. In verse 33, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. So the Jews who caused to be wise, That's those who believe and know the truth, instructed others in the scriptures while also suffering continued persecution. Verse 34, now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. So compromisers among the Jews were enticed by flattery to side with Antiochus and be corrupted. And many would fall away, and the Jews committed to the covenant would have little help, humanly speaking. And some, fearing the faithful's remnants down with the apostates, pretended loyalty. And some theologians see verse 34 as a reference to Mattathias, an elderly priest, and his 5 sons who waged guerrilla warfare against the forced Hellenization of the Greek ways of the Jews. And Mattathias died in 166 BC, and his sons, also known as the Maccabees, carried on the struggle victory achieved under Judas Maccabees in December 164 BC, when the temple was cleansed and daily sacrifices were restored. In verse 35, and some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So, paced by persecution, some who remained true to God's understanding, aka the true believers, were to fall as martyrs. And the gracious design of such suffering was to sanctify them. The persecution pattern continues until the end that God appointed at Christ's second coming. And the second reference to this end prepares for the transition in verse 36 to the final tribulation times, when the Antichrist, whom Antiochus prefigures, will be in power. And God has a purpose even for persecution and blasphemy. Sometimes we think that those things might be out of God's hands, but he has a purpose by having them happen. And when we study the book of Acts, we see through persecution was when the church grew. In verse 36 says, then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. So the chapter from here on points to the future time of the end in verse 35. And it summarizes the details of Daniel's 70th week, which are found nowhere else in Scripture. In Antiochus Epiphanes, a type of Christ, is the perfect transition point to the actual Christ in the last 7 years before Christ's millennial kingdom. And this willful king is the final Antichrist, just as with Antiochus, the time of persecution is subject to God's control. And the angel explained to Daniel that this king would blaspheme God and exalt himself until the wrath had been accomplished. And we can think of Antiochus Epiphanes as the trailer release well before the Antichrist. And God's purpose, no matter what, will be accomplished. In verse 37, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of woman, nor regard any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. So we see God is also called Elohim. And the pagan Gentiles have their tradition gods passed down from their fathers, but the king had no regard for any of them. And his only God is power. The desire of woman, also in verse 37, is an interesting couple words. And some theologians will argue that this means that the Antichrist is going to be a homosexual, but definitely means that he won't have a natural desire of interest of woman. So he could be asexual. We don't know for sure. And my personal stance is I believe asexual, because I don't see anywhere that points to him having a intimate partner. So asexual, if you don't know human sexuality terms, asexual is someone who doesn't have intimacy toward either sex. Basically, they don't have any interest in sexuality. So verse 38 and 39 to continue says, "But in their place he shall honor a god of fortresses, and a god which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones, and with pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, and he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain." So the term for fortress is used 5 other times, as you probably heard in this chapter, and each time means a strong place. And power is to be his god, and he spends all his treasures to become powerful and to finance wars. And with this power, he will attack every stronghold. In verse 40 through 43, as we get closer to the end here, it says, "At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from the hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels." So here is the final north and southern conflict. In the south was Egypt in their earlier context. Here it is the last great battle, with the final army from the north retaliating against the attack of the final southern African power. And the Antichrist won't allow this without striking back and winning, defending both, as recorded in verse 41. And the willful king Antichrist withstands onslaughts from both, prevails entering Israel, and perhaps committing at that time the abomination of desolation from back in Daniel 9:23. And with this victory, he will be established in power for a time. In verse 44 says, "But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many." So military bulletins alert the willful king and his victories of other sectors of the world, deploying troops to the Palestinian theater. In verse 45, "And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him." So to face the latest threats, the willful king sets up his command post between somewhere like the Mediterranean Sea, the Dead Sea, or perhaps the Sea of Galilee, and the holy mountain of Jerusalem. And his troops fell in the land in Zechariah the prophet, as recorded Zechariah 12 verse 2 and 3, and Zechariah 14 verse 2 and 3 seen. And no one is able to help him against God, who by the return of Christ brings him to his end, also what we call the Battle of Armageddon. And in the end, there's no hope for the Antichrist or his followers. And that's the good news out of this. So 34 and a half minutes later, we are doing our wrap-up now. So tonight we look at the division of the Greek Empire with the 4 future kings. And verse 3 and 4 shows the rise of the mighty king. 4 mighty kings. Verse 5 shows, it moves into the strength of the king of the south. Verse 6 shows the marriage between the families of the kings of the north and the south. Verse 7 and 9 shows the army from the south defeats the kingdom of the north. Verse 10 shows the sons of the kings of the north in their victory. Verse 11 and 12 shows the king of the south gains an upper hand on the northern king. Verse 13 through 16 shows the king of the north and his occupation of the glorious land. Verse 17 shows the king of the south would give his daughter to the king of the north. Verse 18-19 shows that the king of the north is stopped and stumbles. Verse 20 shows the brief reign of the succeeding king of the north. Verse 21 shows the vile person Antiochus IV came to power. Verse 22 through 27 show that he failed to conquer the king of the south. Verse 28 through 35 shows that he turns on the Holy Land with violence. And we spoke of the abomination of desolation once again. And I want to look at the Olivet Discourse, Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. This is Jesus speaking here. It says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand." And I'm actually going to continue reading through verse 16. "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So, Jesus spoke of the abomination of desolation from Daniel words as well. Verse 36 moved into the future fulfillment. In verse 36, the Apostle Paul paraphrased the verse in reference to the coming of the Antichrist. Let's go over to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And I was going to do verse 2, but I'm going to bump it up into verse 1 through 4. So 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 1 through 4. "Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, we ask you not to be soon shaken in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as though the day of Christ had come. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." So the Antichrist is going to pretty much mock God. In Revelation 13, verse 4. Four through 7 says, "So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?' And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And the authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation." So, moving on, Daniel 11, verse 37 through 39 showed the character and the authority of the willful king. And the chapter ended with the final conflict. Let's go to Revelation chapter 9 and verse 16. And I just want to remind you that my friend Brian Peckham is doing a study focused on Revelation on Saturdays at 12 noon. Revelation 9, verse 16. It says here, "Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them." So John spoke of the large military as well. And then let's go into Revelation 19, verse 17. Revelation 19:17 through 19 says, "Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. So we see the Battle of Armageddon being spoken about, where the Antichrist is defeated. And we'll see you next, as we will be wrapping up the book of Daniel, and I'll let you know when that will be next. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless, and thank you for hanging in there for almost 41 minutes. This is the longest video in a little bit of time. So God bless, and we'll see you for the end of Daniel next.